The clinking of crystal was the sound of my kingdom, until a pair of scuffed boots and a faded red hat shattered my perfectly curated world. I thought I was kicking a problem out the door, but it turned out I was kicking out my new boss. The clinking of crystal on marble. That's the sound of my kingdom. The Elysian Grand wasn't just a hotel. It was my masterpiece. For 7 years, I'd cultivated an atmosphere of serene, untouchable luxury. Every detail, from the thread count of the sheets to the precise temperature of the lobby, was under my control. Our clientele was the quiet money, the old families, the tech moguls who wore $1,000 sweaters that looked like they came from a department store. They didn't come here to be seen. They came here to be invisible, swaddled in a cocoon of effortless elegance that I, Alexander Vance, had painstakingly woven. Then, the sale happened. Some faceless conglomerate, Sterling Holdings, bought us out. The transition was a nightmare of conference calls and paperwork, but the message from the top was clear. Don't change a thing. The new owner, a mysterious billionaire named Alistair Sterling, had apparently bought the hotel because he admired its, and I quote, uncompromising standard of excellence. That was me. I was that standard. So, with the final handover just days away, I was running a tighter ship than ever. I was on edge, a conductor listening for a single sour note in his orchestra. That sour note walked in at 3:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. The lobby was in its usual state of hushed grace. A world-renowned pianist was coaxing a gentle melody from our Steinway Grand. A couple, who I recognized from a recent Vanity Fair cover, was sipping champagne near the fireplace. The air smelled of white tea and bergamot, our signature scent. And through the revolving glass doors strode a man who looked like he'd taken a wrong turn on his way to a tractor pull. He wasn't loud or aggressive. In a way, that made it worse. He was a visual violation of the space. Faded blue jeans, scuffed work boots that left dusty prints on my polished Italian marble, and a flannel shirt that had seen better decades. But all of that was just the backdrop. The centerpiece, the real offense, was the hat. A bright red Make America Great Again hat perched squarely on his head. It was like a grenade rolled into the middle of a meditation retreat. Heads turned. The pianist faltered for a fraction of a second. The conversation by the fireplace dipped into a whisper. In my world, politics were discussed in hushed tones in private suites, not brandished like a weapon in my lobby. This wasn't about the slogan on the hat. It was about the flagrant disregard for the environment I had bled for. It was a middle finger to civility, a ketchup stain on a silk dress. I felt a hot flush of anger crawl up my neck. I straightened my tie, the knot suddenly feeling too tight. My staff looked to me, their eyes wide. They knew my rules. They knew my standards. And this man was a walking, breathing violation of every single one of them. I took a deep, calming breath and began to glide across the floor, my polished Oxfords making no sound. My smile was practiced, professional, a mask of courteous steel. "Good afternoon, sir," I began, my voice a smooth, calm river that I hoped would carry him right back out the door. "Welcome to the Elysian Grand. Do you have a reservation with us?" He looked up at me, and I was struck by how old he seemed up close. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes a pale, tired blue. He looked less like a political firebrand, and more like someone's grandfather who had just driven a long, long way. For a second, a flicker of something pity, maybe, threatened to soften my resolve. I stamped it out. The Elysian Grand was no place for pity. "Nope," he said, his voice raspy. "Just waiting for a ride." "I see," I said, my smile not wavering. "While you wait, I do have to ask you to please remove your hat. We have a dress code in the common areas. No hats indoors. It's for the comfort of all our guests." It was a simple, elegant solution. A house rule. Inarguable. He looked around the opulent lobby, at the crystal chandeliers and the velvet settees, and then his gaze landed back on me. A faint, almost sad smile touched his lips. "It's comfortable," he said, tapping the brim of the red cap. "I'll keep it on." My own smile froze on my face. The polite request had been denied. This was no longer a simple misunderstanding. It was a challenge. He was testing me. He was testing my authority in my own hotel. The quiet hum of the lobby seemed to amplify, every pair of eyes drilling into my back. They were all watching, waiting to see how the great Alexander Vance would handle this intrusion. "Sir," I said, my voice losing its manufactured warmth and taking on an edge of ice. "This is a private establishment. The policy is not a suggestion. I must insist you remove the hat. or I will have to ask you to wait for your ride outside." He just shook his head slowly, a look of profound disappointment in his tired eyes. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just sat there, in his faded jeans and his red hat, a stubborn, unmovable rock in the middle of my perfectly manicured stream. And that calm defiance was more infuriating than any shouting match could ever be. I had offered him an exit, a chance to comply with grace. He had refused. Now, he had to be removed. I subtly signaled Daniel, my head of security, who had been watching from his discreet post near the elevators. Daniel was a mountain of a man in a perfectly tailored suit, a gentle giant until he was told not to be. He moved towards us, his presence alone a form of intimidation. "Sir, this is your final chance," I said, my voice low and final. "Leave, or you will be escorted from the premises." The man looked from me to the approaching form of Daniel. He let out a long, weary sigh, as if he'd been expecting this all along. He pushed himself to his feet, the old joints cracking softly. As he stood up, he looked me dead in the eye. There was no anger there, just a strange, quiet sorrow. "You're going to regret this, son," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I doubt that very much," I replied crisply, turning my back on him as Daniel gently but firmly guided him toward the exit. I watched in the reflection of a gilded mirror as the revolving doors swept him out of my hotel and out of my life. A wave of relief washed over me. The problem was solved. The standard was upheld. The symphony was back in tune. I straightened my tie, took a deep breath of the bergamot-scented air, and allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. My kingdom was safe. Just then, my personal cell phone, the one reserved for emergencies and upper management, buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number, but it was flagged with a high-priority marker from the new corporate network. My heart skipped a beat. It had to be someone from Sterling Holdings. Perhaps they'd heard about my decisive action, a report on how I protected the brand's integrity. I stepped into my office just off the lobby and answered, my voice the epitome of calm professionalism. "Alexander Vance speaking." "Mr. Vance," a clipped female voice said on the other end. "Please hold for Mr. Sterling." My blood ran cold. The Mr. Sterling? The new owner? My mind raced. Before I could even formulate a thought, a new voice came on the line. It was deep, gravelly, and bone-tired, and it was horrifyingly familiar. "So," the voice said, a weary sigh crackling through the phone, "this is Alistair. I believe your security guard just threw me out of my own hotel." The phone felt like a block of ice in my hand, then a hot coal. My own voice, usually a finely tuned instrument of authority, came out as a strangled squeak. "Mr. Sterling, I apologize. There must be some sort of colossal misunderstanding." A dry, mirthless chuckle echoed down the line. "Misunderstanding? Son, I think I understood things perfectly. I saw a man who judges people by the hat on their head instead of the reservation in their name. I saw a manager more concerned with appearances than with hospitality. You have a beautiful building, Mr. Vance. It's a shame about the welcome." My world was tilting on its axis. The meticulously organized pens on my mahogany desk suddenly seemed chaotic. The faint scent of leather polish in my office felt suffocating. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles white. "Sir, I had no idea. If you had identified yourself, the man I saw, he didn't look like—" I trailed off, the words tasting like poison. "Like a billionaire? What did a billionaire look like? Apparently, sometimes they looked like a tired old man in a flannel shirt." "That was the point," Sterling's voice cut through my pathetic stammering, sharp as broken glass. "I didn't buy the Elysian to be treated like a king. I can get that anywhere. I bought it because I heard it was a place where excellence was the standard, for everyone. I wanted to see it for myself, from the ground up. Before the suits and the lawyers got involved, I wanted to see what a regular person, just waiting for a ride, would experience." He paused, and the silence stretched for an eternity. "And I have my answer. My career flashed before my eyes. 7 years of tireless work, of sacrificing evenings and weekends, of building this place into my personal Eden. All of it was turning to ash in a single phone call. Mr. Sterling, please," I begged, the last shreds of my professional dignity evaporating. What I did was inexcusable. It was a lapse in judgment, an error of a magnitude I cannot express. "Allow me to make it right. I will do anything." "Anything is a big word, Mr. Vance," he said, and I could almost hear the weary smile in his voice. "I'm sitting in a diner on the corner of 5th and Madison. It's called the Greasy Spoon. I think the name tells you everything you need to know about its dress code. You have 10 minutes to get here. Come alone. And don't keep me waiting." The line went dead. For a moment I was paralyzed. The Greasy Spoon? I knew the place. It was a relic, a grimy hole in the wall I wouldn't set foot in, even if I was starving. The thought of going there, of groveling before the man I'd just thrown out of my hotel, was nauseating. But the alternative, doing nothing, waiting for the inevitable email from corporate announcing my termination, was infinitely worse. I burst out of my office. The lobby, which moments ago had been my sanctuary, now felt like a stage where my humiliation was the main event. The pianist was playing a Chopin nocturne, a melody that now sounded like a funeral dirge for my career. The couple by the fireplace glanced up, their polite smiles seeming to mock me. I saw Daniel, my head of security, standing by his post. He gave me a questioning look. I couldn't meet his eyes. I just shook my head and pushed through the revolving doors, fleeing my own kingdom. The city hit me like a physical blow. The cacophony of horns, the smell of street vendor hot dogs and exhaust fumes, the crush of bodies on the sidewalk. It was the chaos I had so carefully designed the Elysian to keep at bay. I broke into a frantic walk, half jogging, my expensive suit jacket clinging to my back with nervous sweat. Every face in the crowd seemed to be judging me. Every red sign, every red traffic light seemed to scream at me, a reminder of that damned hat. I saw the diner's flickering neon sign from half a block away. It was everything I despised, cheap, loud, and utterly devoid of grace. I pushed open the grimy glass door, a little bell tinkling pathetically overhead. The air was thick with the smell of fried onions and old coffee. A waitress with a world-weary face shot me a hostile glare, her eyes lingering on my silk tie as if it were an alien artifact. And there he was. Alistair Sterling was sitting in a cracked red vinyl booth by the window, staring out at the traffic. The offensive red hat was off his head, sitting on the Formica tabletop next to a thick, chipped mug of coffee. He was nursing it with both hands, looking smaller and older under the harsh fluorescent lights. He didn't look like a titan of industry. He looked like my grandfather after a long day of yard work. I approached the table, my heart hammering against my ribs. My throat was dry. I had 1,000 apologies rehearsed, a symphony of excuses and self-flagellation ready to perform. "Mr. Sterling," I began, my voice cracking, "I am so profoundly—" He held up a hand, silencing me without even looking at me. His gaze remained fixed on the street outside. "Sit down, Vance," he said quietly. I slid into the opposite side of the booth, the vinyl sticking to my trousers. I sat there in excruciating silence, waiting for the axe to fall. He took a slow sip of his coffee, then finally turned his pale blue eyes on me. They weren't angry anymore. They were filled with a deep, unsettling weariness. "My best friend, a man I served with in Vietnam, died 2 years ago," he said, his voice flat and even. "He was a carpenter. Never made much money, but he was the best man I ever knew. This was his hat." He gently touched the red fabric on the table. He wore it every day. He believed in what it stood for. Not the noise, not the politics you see on TV, but the idea of it. The idea of building things, of taking pride in your work. He gave it to me right before he passed, said it would bring me luck. I felt sick, utterly, physically ill. "I'm not going to fire you, Alexander," he continued, and a tiny, foolish spark of hope ignited in my chest. He then looked me straight in the eye, and that spark was instantly extinguished by the arctic coldness of his gaze. "That would be too easy. Firing you lets you off the hook. You'd just go be an elitist snob at some other fancy hotel. No, you and we're going to have a lesson in perspective." He took another slow sip of coffee, letting the words hang in the greasy air between us. "Starting tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. sharp, you're no longer the general manager of the Elysian Grand." He paused, watching my face crumble. "You're my new personal driver, and your first official duty," he said, slowly pushing the bright red MAGA hat across the sticky table until it stopped right in front of me, "is to wear this every minute of every day that you're working for me." The red hat sat on the grimy Formica tabletop like a judgment. Its color seemed impossibly loud in the dim light of the diner, a glaring symbol of my downfall. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Me, Alexander Vance, curator of the Elysian Grand, reduced to a chauffeur, and forced to wear that? It was a humiliation so profound, so exquisitely tailored to my personal hell, that it felt like a hallucination. "Mr. Sterling, you can't be serious," I whispered, my voice hoarse. His eyes, which had seemed so tired a moment ago, now held a glint of unyielding steel. I have never been more serious in my life, son. You think running a hotel is about thread counts and fancy perfume? You think it's about keeping out people who don't fit your little aesthetic? That's not management. That's curating a museum. A hotel, a real hotel, is about people. All kinds of people. And you, Alexander, have forgotten what people look like. He pushed himself out of the booth, his movements slow and deliberate. He tossed a few crumpled bills onto the table. My town car is a black Lincoln Navigator. It's parked 2 blocks south, right in front of your hotel. The keys are in the ignition. My luggage is in the back. I'll be out in 5 minutes. Don't be late. He started to walk away, then stopped and looked back at me, his gaze dropping to the hat on the table. And don't forget your new uniform. He walked out, the little bell over the door tinkling mockingly. I was left alone in the booth, the stench of stale coffee and my own failure thick in the air. The waitress shot me another dirty look from behind the counter. I stared at the hat. It felt like a venomous creature, something I couldn't bear to touch. Every fiber of my being screamed in protest. This wasn't just a hat. It was an annihilation of my identity. It was a public branding. Everyone who saw me would know. The staff I had meticulously trained, the high-profile guests who respected my authority, they would all see me reduced to this caricature. But what choice did I have? I could walk out, preserve my pride, and find myself unemployed and blacklisted by a man who could probably buy and sell the entire city block with his pocket change. Or I could swallow the bitterest pill I'd ever encountered and endure this bizarre penance. I reached out a trembling hand and picked it up. The fabric was coarse, the brim stiff. It felt alien in my manicured hands. I took a deep breath, stood up, and placed it on my head. The walk back to the Elysian was a walk of shame. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, even though no one was probably paying me any attention. The hat felt like it weighed 100 pounds, pressing down on me, marking me. When I reached the hotel, Daniel was still at his post by the door. His eyes widened almost comically as he saw me. He saw my expensive suit, my defeated posture, and the garish red hat perched on my head. He opened his mouth to speak, but I just held up a hand, shook my head, and walked past him without a word. I couldn't bear the questions. I couldn't bear the pity. I found the Lincoln Navigator exactly where Sterling had said it would be. It was an imposing beast of a vehicle, gleaming under the streetlights. The interior smelled of rich leather and quiet power, a stark contrast to the greasy diner. I sat in the driver's seat, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The man looking back at me was a stranger, a ghost in a suit, haunted by a red hat. True to his word, 5 minutes later, Alistair Sterling emerged from the hotel. A doorman, one of my hand-picked staff, rushed to open the car door for him, his face a mask of professional courtesy. Sterling got into the back seat without a word, and the door clicked shut. There was a long, heavy silence. I didn't know what to do. Was I supposed to speak? Ask where we were going? So, his voice came from the back, calm and detached. How does it feel, Alexander, to be on the other side of the door? It's humbling, sir, I managed to say, my voice tight. Good, he said. Humility is the first lesson. Now drive. We're going to my home in Connecticut. He gave me the address, a town I only knew as a zip code for the ultra-wealthy. The drive out of the city was surreal. I was operating on autopilot, navigating through traffic while my mind churned. This wasn't just a job change. It was a total inversion of my reality. I was used to giving orders, to being in control. Now I was taking them, a silent, uniformed servant. The silence in the car was heavy, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional direction from Sterling in the back. He wasn't cruel or taunting. He was just watching, observing me. It was somehow worse. We arrived at a massive gated estate hours later. The gate swung open silently, and I drove up a long, winding driveway, flanked by ancient oak trees. The house wasn't a modern glass palace, but a sprawling old-money stone manor that looked like it had been there for centuries. It was a home that whispered wealth. It didn't scream it. It was the kind of place my usual clientele would have owned. I parked in front of the grand entrance and got out to open his door. A butler, a man who looked even more severe and professional than I did in my prime, was already there to greet him. "Welcome home, Mr. Sterling," the butler said, his voice a low, respectful murmur. "Thank you, Miles," Sterling replied. He then turned to me. "Your quarters are above the garage. Miles will show you. Be ready at 5 a.m. tomorrow. We have an early start." He turned and walked into the house without another word. Miles, the butler, looked me up and down. His gaze lingered for a moment on the red hat, and a flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Disdain? Curiosity? He simply nodded curtly. "This way, sir." He led me to a pristine, but small, apartment above a 4-car garage filled with vintage sports cars. It was clean, functional, and utterly soulless. It was a servant's quarters. My new home. After showing me the basics, Miles paused at the door. "Mr. Sterling is a man of particular habits," he said, his tone clipped and formal. "He values punctuality and discretion above all else. Do not disappoint him." He closed the door, leaving me alone in the sterile silence. I sank onto the edge of the bed and finally took off the hat, dropping it on the floor as if it were contaminated. I looked around the small room. This was my life now, my punishment, waking up before dawn to serve the man I had scorned. And it wasn't just about driving. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was just the beginning. This was about breaking me down, stripping away the arrogance and the pride, piece by agonizing piece. The next morning I was up at 4:30 a.m. I put on a fresh suit, the fabric feeling like a costume, and then, with a deep sense of revulsion, I put on the hat. I met Sterling by the car at 5 a.m. sharp. He was dressed not in a suit, but in the same kind of simple, functional clothes he'd worn to the hotel jeans, a plain gray sweater. He looked like a retired contractor, not a captain of industry. "Morning," he grunted, climbing into the back. "First stop Brooklyn, a construction site." I drove in silence, following the GPS into a part of Brooklyn that was all warehouses and industrial grit. We pulled up to a massive site where the skeleton of a new skyscraper was rising into the morning mist. Men in hard hats and reflective vests were already swarming over it like ants. Sterling got out, and I followed, unsure of my role. "Stay with me," he said. He walked onto the site like he owned the place, which, I was beginning to realize, he probably did. He greeted the foreman by name, shaking his hand firmly. He talked to welders and electricians, asking about their families, about the tensile strength of a particular steel beam. He wasn't just inspecting, he was connecting. He moved with an easy confidence that I, in my tailored suit and my years of managing luxury, had never possessed. And all the while, I stood a few feet behind him, a silent observer in a suit and a red hat, feeling more out of place than I had ever felt in my life. The construction workers gave me strange looks, their eyes flicking from my expensive shoes to my hat, a combination that made no sense. After an hour, Sterling clapped the foreman on the back, and we headed back to the car. "Those men," he said as I started the engine, "they're the ones who build the world, Alexander. They don't care about the thread count in your sheets. They care about a fair wage, a safe site, and getting home to their kids. Remember their faces." Our day continued like that. We didn't go to boardrooms or fancy lunches. We went to a struggling community center in the Bronx that his foundation was funding. We went to a small, family-owned factory in Queens that manufactured components for his aerospace division. At each stop, he was the same. Quiet, observant, talking to the people on the ground, the ones doing the real work. And at each stop, I was his shadow, the silent man in the ridiculous hat, my old world of champagne and civility fading into a distant, irrelevant memory. By late afternoon, I was emotionally and mentally exhausted. We were driving back towards Manhattan. I assumed we were heading for the Elysian, where he would finally take his rightful place. But he gave me a different address. It was an unassuming office building in Midtown. "Park in the garage downstairs," he said. "There's a meeting I have to attend." I followed his instructions, parking the massive SUV in a reserved spot. "Wait here," he said, getting out of the car. "I shouldn't be long." I sat in the silence of the underground garage, the engine ticking as it cooled. I leaned my head back against the leather headrest and closed my eyes, the red hat digging into my forehead. I felt a sense of profound dislocation, as if I were a character in someone else's strange play. Who was this man? This billionaire who dressed like a farmer and spent his days with construction workers and factory hands? What was the point of all this? What was he trying to prove? An hour passed, then another. I was starting to get restless. The concrete cavern of the parking garage was starting to feel claustrophobic. Finally, I heard the ding of an elevator and the doors sliding open. I looked up, expecting to see Sterling. Instead, 3 people walked out. 2 men in sharp, severe suits and a woman with an icy demeanor and a leather briefcase. They looked like lawyers, corporate assassins. They walked with a predatory purpose, and my heart began to pound. They stopped directly in front of the Lincoln, their faces grim. The woman, who appeared to be in charge, stepped forward and tapped on my window. I rolled it down, my mouth suddenly dry. Can I help you? She didn't look at me. She looked past me, into the empty back seat of the car. Her eyes were cold, her voice colder. We're here for Mr. Sterling. We have a court order. She held up a sheaf of papers. Alistair Sterling is being formally removed from the board of Sterling Holdings. His assets are frozen, pending a competency hearing. He no longer has any authority here, or anywhere else. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Removed? Competency hearing? Frozen assets? The world, which had already been tilting precariously, suddenly flipped upside down. The woman's voice was devoid of emotion, a clinical executioner's pronouncement. The two men behind her stood like statues, their expressions unreadable, their presence radiating a cold, corporate menace. This wasn't a business disagreement, it was a coup. There must be a mistake, I stammered, my hand still on the window control. He's Mr. Sterling. He owns the company. The woman gave a thin, dismissive smile. It didn't reach her eyes. He was the majority shareholder. The board has voted. His erratic behavior over the last several months has given us cause for serious concern. This excursion of his, she gestured vaguely, as if to encompass our entire bizarre day, was the final straw. He is to be considered a private citizen with no connection to Sterling Holdings or any of its properties, including the Elysian Grand Hotel. Are we clear? My mind was a whirlwind of confusion. Erratic behavior. The man I'd spent the day with was unconventional, certainly, but he seemed as sharp and grounded as anyone I'd ever met. Was this whole thing, the clothes, the hat, the tour of his blue-collar empire part of some larger pattern of instability that I was too naive to see? Or was something far more sinister at play? Where is he? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He's in the building, being apprised of the situation by our legal team, the woman said, her tone making it sound more like an interrogation than a briefing. Our instructions are to secure his personal vehicle and effects. You will give me the keys, and then you will leave. Your employment, whatever it was, is terminated. She held out a perfectly manicured hand, waiting for the keys. I looked at her hand, then at the empty back seat where my strange, perplexing tormentor had sat just hours before. A week ago, I would have handed them over without a second thought. I would have sided with the power, with the sharp suits and the cold, corporate efficiency. They were my people. But something had shifted in me. I thought of the tired look in Sterling's eyes in that greasy diner. I thought of the genuine warmth in his voice when he spoke to the foreman at the construction site. I thought of his dead friend's hat, still sitting on my head. No, I said. The word came out stronger than I expected. The woman's eyebrows shot up. The two men behind her shifted their weight, a subtle, predatory movement. Excuse me? She said, her voice dripping with disbelief. I said no, I repeated, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. I work for Mr. Sterling. Not for you, not for the board. Until he tells me otherwise, I'm not going anywhere, and neither is his car. For a moment, nobody moved. The silence in the concrete garage was absolute. The woman stared at me as if I were a particularly disgusting insect she had just found on her shoe. It was a look I recognized. It was a look I had perfected. It was the look I had given Alistair Sterling just yesterday. The irony was so thick I could taste it. You are making a very foolish mistake, she said, her voice dropping to a low, threatening hiss. She pulled out her phone and started tapping at it furiously. Security will be down in 2 minutes to remove you. Have it your way. My heart was hammering. What was I doing? I was a chauffeur, a glorified servant, defying a team of corporate sharks. This was insanity. But the thought of abandoning Sterling, of leaving him alone upstairs to be devoured by these wolves, was suddenly unthinkable. He had humiliated me, yes. He had stripped me of my dignity. But in the process, he had also shown me something. A world beyond my gilded cage. A world of real people, of real work. A world he seemed to care about more than his own billion-dollar fortune. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here and wait for security. My eyes darted around the garage, exit signs, ramps. My mind, usually occupied with floral arrangements and wine pairings, was now racing like a getaway driver's. I looked at the 3 figures in my rearview mirror, their backs now turned to me as they conferred in low, urgent tones. This was my only chance. Without another thought, I turned the key I had foolishly left in the ignition. The powerful engine of the Lincoln Navigator roared to life, the sound echoing off the concrete walls like a thunderclap. The 3 corporate assassins spun around, their faces a mixture of shock and fury. I slammed the gearshift into reverse, not even bothering to check behind me, and stomped on the accelerator. The massive SUV shot backwards. I heard a sickening crunch as the rear bumper connected with a concrete pillar, but I didn't care. The woman and her two goons scattered, leaping out of the way. I cranked the wheel, shifted into drive, and floored it. The tires squealed in protest as I aimed the navigator for the exit ramp. I shot up the ramp, bursting out onto the street and into the chaotic flow of late afternoon Manhattan traffic. Horns blared around me. I glanced in the rearview mirror. I could see the woman standing at the garage entrance, phone pressed to her ear, her face a mask of incandescent rage. I had just stolen a car and assaulted a pillar in front of a half-dozen witnesses, all to save a man who had made my life a living hell. I started laughing. It was a wild, unhinged sound that filled the luxurious cabin of the car. My laughter died as the reality of my situation crashed down on me. What now? I was a fugitive in a stolen car. Sterling was trapped upstairs, being legally and financially disemboweled by his own company. I couldn't go back to the hotel. I couldn't go back to his estate in Connecticut. I was effectively homeless, unemployed, and probably about to have a warrant out for my arrest. I just kept driving, my mind racing. I had to get to Sterling, but how? I couldn't go back to the front of the building. They'd be waiting for me. I circled the block, my eyes scanning the building. It was a standard glass and steel monolith, dozens of stories high. There had to be another way in. A service entrance, a delivery bay. I found it in the alley behind the building. A large rolling metal gate, currently closed with a small security booth next to it. It was my only shot. I parked the damaged navigator a block away, pulled the red hat down low over my eyes, and walked towards the alley as if I belonged there. My heart pounded with every step. I was improvising, running on pure adrenaline. As I got closer, I saw a lone security guard in the booth, reading a newspaper. I needed a distraction, something to get him out of that booth. My eyes fell on a pile of trash bags waiting for pickup. An idea, desperate and insane, sparked in my mind. I walked past the alley, then doubled back. I grabbed a large, overflowing bag of garbage, hoisted it over my shoulder, and with a grunt of effort, I tossed it onto the hood of a gleaming black Mercedes parked across the street. The car alarm shrieked to life, a piercing, deafening wail. It worked. The guard in the booth cursed, threw down his paper, and ran out into the street to deal with the commotion. The moment his back was turned, I sprinted for the security booth. I ducked inside, my eyes scanning the console. There was a big, green button labeled Gate. I slammed my hand down on it. With a loud groan of machinery, the large metal gate began to roll upwards. I didn't wait for it to open all the way. I slipped under it and found myself in a cavernous loading dock. I was in. Now I just had to find Sterling in a 40-story office building without getting caught. I saw a door marked Stairs and ran for it, my polished Oxford slapping against the dirty concrete. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my lungs burning, my mind screaming at the absurdity of it all. The man in the $1,000 suit and the MAGA hat, playing action hero to rescue his captor. I had no idea what floor he was on. I started trying the doors at every landing. Locked, locked, locked. Finally, on the 24th floor, the handle turned. I slipped into a deserted, dimly lit hallway. It was eerily quiet. The offices were all dark. It was after 5. Most people had gone home. At the far end of the hall, I could see light spilling from under a single door. A conference room. I could hear voices from within, low and tense. I crept down the hallway, my back pressed against the wall, my heart feeling like it was going to explode. As I got closer, I could make out the voices. It was the icy woman from the garage, and another man. But the voice that made the blood freeze in my veins was the one that answered them. It was calm, familiar, and filled with a chilling amusement. It was the voice of Miles, the butler. "The board is in agreement," the woman was saying. "He'll be transferred to the facility in the morning. With you as his legal guardian, the transfer of assets can proceed immediately." "Excellent," Miles's smooth, cultured voice replied. "The old fool should have listened to me years ago. All that talk of legacy and the working man. A fortune that large isn't meant to be given away. It's meant to be taken." A chair scraped against the floor. "Now, I believe we have a driver to deal with." My mind struggled to process the treachery. Miles, the severe, loyal butler who had spoken of Sterling's particular habits, was the architect of his downfall. He wasn't a servant. He was a viper Sterling had welcomed into his own home. The erratic behavior, the competency hearing, it was all a lie, a beautifully constructed cage to trap Sterling and seize his empire. And I, in my blind arrogance, had almost helped them lock the door. A cold, clarifying rage washed over me, extinguishing the last flicker of fear. This was no longer about saving my own skin. It was about justice. I looked down at my hands, manicured, soft. They were the hands of a manager, not a fighter. But then I looked at the red hat reflected in the darkened office window across the hall. It was the hat of a builder, a worker, a man who got things done. I took a deep breath, straightened my suit, and walked to the conference room door. I didn't knock. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The scene was exactly as I'd pictured it. The icy woman, I would later learn her name, was Eleanor Vance, no relation, thank God, and her two suited thugs were on one side of a massive mahogany table. Miles stood at the head of the table, a smug, triumphant look on his face. And at the far end, sitting alone, was Alistair Sterling. He didn't look defeated. He just looked tired. He saw me, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine surprise crossed his features. Miles was the first to recover. His face twisted into a mask of fury. "You, how did you get in here? Security." "They're a little busy," I said, my voice steady. I pulled my phone from my pocket. "And you might want to keep your voice down. This has been recording for the last 2 minutes." The part about him being an old fool, and how a fortune is meant to be taken, should be particularly interesting to a judge. Panic flashed in Miles's eyes. Eleanor stood up, pointing a trembling finger at me. "That's illegal. You can't record us without consent. In this state, I only need the consent of one party in the conversation, and since I'm about to join in, I think we're covered," I bluffed, praying my high school civics knowledge was correct. "But let's not get bogged down in legalities. The point is, your little coup is over." "Don't be ridiculous," Miles sneered, recovering his composure. "It's your word against ours. A disgruntled chauffeur. Who are they going to believe?" "That's a good question," Alistair Sterling said, speaking for the first time. His voice was quiet but carried an immense weight. He slowly stood up, his eyes fixed on Miles. "Who are they going to believe, Miles? The man you've worked for 30 years, or the man who is suddenly set to inherit everything after I'm locked away in a facility?" He turned his gaze to Eleanor. "And you, Ms. Vance? Your firm has an impeccable reputation. How will your other clients feel when they learn you conspired to defraud one of the wealthiest men in the country based on the testimony of a disgruntled servant?" He was magnificent. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't threatening. He was calmly, methodically dismantling their entire conspiracy with simple logic. He wasn't the victim here. I was just the idiot who had kicked the hornet's nest. He had been playing his own game all along. "This is absurd," Eleanor snapped, but her voice lacked conviction. She started gathering her papers, shoving them into her briefcase. "This meeting is over." "Not quite," Sterling said. He looked at me, a strange, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "Alexander, be a good lad and call Arthur Pennington for me. He's on speed dial. Tell him I have a situation involving a breach of fiduciary duty and attempted fraud. He'll know what to do." As I dialed, the two suited men, who had been silent this whole time, took a step towards Sterling. "We have a court order," one of them grunted. "He's not going anywhere." Before I could even react, Sterling moved with a speed that defied his age. He picked up a heavy glass water pitcher from the table and hurled it, not at the men, but at the massive plate glass window overlooking the city. It shattered with a deafening crash, the sound echoing through the silent office floor. An alarm immediately began to blare. "A court order won't do you much good when the NYPD shows up to investigate a break-in," Sterling said calmly amidst the chaos. "I suggest the three of you leave, now." Eleanor didn't need to be told twice. She and her two thugs practically ran from the room. Miles stood frozen for a moment, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated hatred. He looked from Sterling to me, and then he too turned and fled. We were left alone in the conference room, the alarm blaring, the cool night air whipping in through the shattered window. Sterling walked over and calmly pressed a button on the wall, silencing the alarm. He looked at the gaping hole in the window, then at me. "That's going to be expensive," he said, a genuine smile finally breaking through his weary facade. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Mr. Sterling, Call me Alistair," he said, walking over to me. He looked at the red hat still perched on my head. "You know, my friend told me that hat would bring me luck. I guess he was right." He paused, his expression turning serious. "You took a hell of a risk for me back there, Alexander. After the way I treated you, after the way you treated me." "Why?" I looked down at the floor, at my scuffed shoes and my rumpled suit. "I'm not sure," I said, honestly. "Yesterday, I would have thrown a man like you out of my hotel without a second thought. and I did. But today, you showed me something. The men building your towers, the women running your community centers. I spent my whole life curating an experience for the 1%. You spent your life building the world the other 99% live in. When I saw what they were trying to do to you, it just felt wrong. It felt like they were trying to tear down something important. He was quiet for a long time, studying my face. You get it, he said finally, a note of wonder in his voice. All my children, all my executives, they never got it. But you, the snobbiest hotel manager I've ever met, you get it. He clapped me on the shoulder. Well, Alexander Vance, your career as my personal driver is officially over. My heart sank. Of course, this was the end. I understand, sir. Good, because I'm offering you a new position, he continued, his eyes twinkling. The Elysian Grand is just one hotel. Sterling Holdings has over 100 properties worldwide. Hotels, resorts, lodges, and they're all run by people like you used to be. People who care more about appearances than people. I need someone to fix that. Someone who understands both worlds. Someone who knows what it's like to be on both sides of the door. The job's yours if you want it. I stared at him, speechless. Head of his entire hospitality division? It was a promotion of an unimaginable scale. There's just one condition, he said, tapping the brim of the red hat on my head. You keep the hat. Not to wear it every day, God no. But keep it in your office, as a reminder, for both of us. And so I did. My corner office on the top floor of Sterling Tower has a view that stretches all the way to the Statue of Liberty. My suit is still tailored. My shoes are still polished. But on the corner of my vast mahogany desk, right next to a picture of my wife and kids, sits a faded, slightly worn, bright red MAGA hat. Some of my executives ask about it. They think it's some kind of political statement, an eccentric quirk of their boss. They don't understand. But I do. It's not about politics. It's a reminder that a kingdom isn't the castle. It's the people. It's a reminder that sometimes the most important man to walk through your door is the one you're most tempted to throw out. And it's a reminder of the day I stopped being a manager and started being a leader.